So I'm not a big fan of introductions, so I'm going to get straight to it. If you want to learn how to hold a handstand, please make sure you can do 10 push-ups and at least 10 seconds of an L-sit. If you can't do that, then learning handstands are going to be way harder than it needs to be. So please don't rush, build up your base, and when you're stronger, you can come back to this. If you can do 10 push-ups and at least hold an L-sit for 10 seconds, then you're ready to start handstand training. Most important thing is warming up. Now, I'm not going to take you through a full warm-up, but what I would normally do is about 5 to 10 minutes of light cardio, depending on how cold it is, to get the blood flow going. Then I'll make sure my mobility and my range of motion, all my joints is up to scratch. I'm just going to take you through wrists, which for me, I think is the most important part to actually warm up. I hope you can see my hands, but I always like to start with wrist walks. So just slowly putting a bit more pressure on the wrists, changing hand positioning. Once you start losing that tender feeling in the wrists and you feel a little bit more ready, you can start doing a little bit more strenuous poses, a bit more of an intense angle on the wrists. A lot of people think that when you're holding a handstand, you're putting your weight perfectly on the palms of your hand. If you're doing that, you don't really have any control. You're actually leaning slightly more into your fingertips and pressing against the floor with them. So finger presses are my favorite thing to actually warm up for a handstand. You don't have to lift up all the way onto your fingertips right away. You can just go up, lifting up your palms. As you get stronger, you can start putting more weight on your hands and lifting up higher onto the fingers, palms facing up, push out to the sides, all different types of variations. Now, if we thoroughly warmed up, there's two main things I like to sort of work on first before we even start attempting to do handstand work, and that's the frog pose and headstands. In the beginning, when you start learning handstands, there's a million things going on, and it's hard for your brain to try to focus on all of them at once. So I recommend separating it into two halves. The frog pose is going to help you to sort of learn what it feels like to have your full body weight over your hands and to get used to that feeling of pressing with your fingertips into the floor. The headstand is going to help with the lower body and core balance and to see what it feels like to actually balance yourself and try to get your center mass in a nice straight line. So working on those two separately, I think gives you a nice foundation to then build into doing handstands. What is the frog pose? Let me quickly demonstrate. Hands shoulders apart, fingers nice and splayed, knees are going to be facing outwards, and we're going to brace our elbows on the inside of our knees. Shift your weight more and more over your hands until your center of mass slowly allows your feet to lift off the floor. And now you're balancing just on your hand. It can be quite freaky and scary if you're not used to it. So instead of lifting off fully, you can lift off just one leg and balance on the toes of the other foot. Vice versa, lift up, lift up. You can do both at the same time, back down. Make sure you feel comfortable. Don't try to dive into it. You want to slowly and gradually lift your feet up off the floor. Okay, trying to set up these angles is hard. Pro is going to help you get used to the feeling of having your full body weight over your hands and pressing those fingers into the floor. Now the headstand is going to, okay, let me take this hoodie off. Make sure you grab yourself a mat. Obviously a headstand is a bit easier than a handstand because you have 3 points of contact. Make sure they're nice and wide, therefore balancing is going to be a bit easier. You can either kick up into a headstand like you would a normal handstand, or you can slowly use your core to lift your feet up. Either way is fine. We're just trying to get used to the feeling of balancing with our lower body and our legs, everything being as compact as possible, keeping tension on the core. Okay, so the cool thing with the headstand is you can start doing core exercises and leg exercises. You can start splitting your legs, straddling them out to the sides. You can go front splits. You can do pike lifts where you keep your legs together, bring them down nice and slow, back up. You can do a tuck to make it easier. You're just basically developing lower body awareness and learning what it feels like to keep your core nice and tight and keep your legs together. When you start doing handstands, it's very hard for your brain to keep track of everything. Your brain's normally going to go straight to your hands, so it forgets what you're doing with your legs. If you can make it second nature for your legs to stay nice and together and to have tension in your core, then when you do handstands, it's going to be a lot easier for you to actually do that in the beginning. So once we start feeling comfortable with our headstands and our frog stand, that's when we can start incorporating the wall and start really working on the handstand technique. This is quite a common mistake amongst beginners. Some people let the ego get the better of them and they think they don't want to use the wall because, you know, I'd rather just go for freestanding attempts. However, all you're really practicing is falling. Whereas if you're using the wall, you're sort of guaranteed to stay upside down on your hands and you can actually build up proper time on your hands and work on your technique. So I think everyone knows when you do a handstand, you're trying to keep your center of mass as straight up balanced over your hands as possible. And you're trying to keep your whole body tight from your feet all the way up to your hands. That is correct, but like I said earlier, you want to actually have a slight more pressure on your fingertips as opposed to your palm. If you're leaning into your fingertips, you can actually control yourself better. Hand placement, I recommend just shoulder width apart or maybe even slightly wider than shoulder width. Eye position or head position, your head should be focusing straight where you want your center of mass to go. So my eyes are going to be staring right between my two hands. Elbows are going to be fully locked. Our scapulars are going to be pressed up. So our shoulders pressing as high as we can towards our ears. Core, glutes, legs, everything nice and tight, squeezing them together, and point your toes to make sure they look pretty. When when it comes to the wall, there's sort of two trains of thought. Some people think you should never do a handstand with your back facing the wall because it's going to teach you the banana technique. For some people, it can be very scary trying to have your chest facing the wall, especially if you don't have somewhere there to spot you. I've got nothing wrong with facing your back towards the wall. Just remember, if you're going to do handstands with your back facing the wall, your natural inclination is to go into that banana shape. So just make sure we're tensing the abs, trying to get into that hollow body shape, keep the glutes nice and tense, so we can have our feet slightly more angled behind us as opposed to leaning forward against the wall. Put both feet against the wall, and then try to take one leg away and try to keep it as tight as possible, and then slowly bring your other leg to meet it. And when it goes to having your chest facing the wall, it can be quite scary, so you don't have to get your hands right up against the wall. You can start further away, and as you get comfortable, work them closer and closer. Same concept as with the back against the wall. We're going to take one leg away and slowly try and meet it with the other leg. You don't have to just do one method or the other. You can incorporate both. Just make sure that you feel comfortable and safe. With your back facing the wall, it's quite simple. If you're going to fall, your legs are just going to come down to the floor, so it's not nearly that scary. With the chest to the wall, it can be quite freaky. If you lose your balance, all you're going to do is you're going to take one hand away and you're sort of going to cartwheel out to the side. You can also practice falling as well. You don't have to start really steep in the beginning. You can go quite gradual incline and then build up over time. So I'll give you a couple of demonstrations of what falling or practicing falling should look like. Just quickly go over how to structure your handstand training session as a beginner. Warm up, do the whole wrist mobility, all of that. Practice your headstands, practice your crow pose, practice your handstands against the wall. And at the end of your session, you can go for freestanding attempts. As you get better, then you can start doing the freestanding attempts in the beginning. But right now, practice on nailing down the form. Now we can start going for freestanding handstand attempts. The first thing is to make sure, like with the chest to the wall, you're comfortable with falling. If you don't know how to fall, doing handstands, there's a whole extra danger element where your brain is now freaked out about falling and not focusing on actually holding the handstand with proper technique. Especially for guys that have tight hamstrings, kicking up into a handstand can be quite an issue. So either they underkick or they overkick, and when you overkick, if you don't know how to fall, it can be quite dangerous. So if you overkick, all you're going to do is take one hand away and cartwheel out. Once you got to the point now where you're just doing freestanding handstands, there's really no secret about it. It's just the more you practice, the better you're going to get. As long as you're trying to do what you did against the wall and you're just focusing on keeping the abs tight, elbows locked, scapulas pressed up towards your ears. I just realized I was probably rushing near the end there. The gym was quite busy. So let me just reiterate what I was trying to say. Once you get to the point where you're doing freestanding handstand attempts, you know what you need to do. It's just a matter of practice. Form-wise, you know exactly what you're aiming for. It's just a matter of your body now developing the motor patterns. So sort of like riding a bike, you might be able to balance for 1 or 2 seconds before you lose it. But the more you do it, the longer you're going to be able to balance, as long as you don't quit and become despondent when you fall in the beginning, which will happen. Trust me, just be consistent with it. Don't rush it. Go back to the basics. Make sure you keep on practicing against the wall, all of that. Keep with it. And if you don't quit, I promise you, before you know it, you'll be able to hold a handstand. I wish you all the best. I hope this video helps. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I'll try to get back to you. All the best.